Introduce our special guest, Attorney General Rob McKenna, and we will be hearing from him, and then hopefully have some time for some questions and answers. So, I'd like to get started. Those of you that aren't finished eating, please continue to eat. Our guest speaker has got places he's got to go. I'd like to welcome everybody that's come here. Those of you who aren't familiar with the Columbia Snake River Irrigators Association, our basic philosophy is keeping the water at the pumps. And it's just not farmers, it's utilities, as you well know, it's cities, municipalities, homeowners. Water has become the new gold. Even The Economist magazine is starting to recognize it as the new gold. It's very important. What the Columbia Snake River is about, and I truly believe is about, is to use the water as beneficially as possible and use it in a way that benefits everybody in the state. And that's kind of our goal, and that's what we work towards. We've got quite a few different things we've done over the years. I won't go into all that. I'll have to tell you, when I took this job on over a year ago, I truly wanted to stay out of politics and things like that, but I've really enjoyed doing it, getting back into meeting people in politics, people like Rob McKenna here, give me some hope that we can pull ourselves out of things. So with that, I'd like to introduce, Rob McKenna is serving his second term as Washington 17th Attorney General. As the Attorney General, he's the Chief Legal Counsel basically for the state, represents the agencies, elected officials, and the people of Washington. He earned his degree from the University of Chicago Law School in 1988, and he was a member of the Law Review there. And this is the part I like. He earned a BA in economics. That's good. We need to have some. And international studies from the University of Washington. So it makes him, for those of you have to accept, those cougars will have to accept that we have a husky here and be nice. But the other thing that impresses me with his pedigree is that he has a family of 4 children, and that impresses me. Anybody that chooses to raise a family in this day and age has got a lot of guts, and it's one of the toughest jobs you'll ever have. But with that, I'd like you to please welcome Attorney General Rob McKenna.
Ron, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's just amazing to me to think about how productive and fertile our state is because of a great deal of human ingenuity and persistence and stick-to-itiveness that was required by the folks who came out here before the water was actually available and started getting ready for the water to be available, as well as those like my wife's family from the Tico, Lehigh area who started farming wheat about 100 years ago. It's amazing to me what has been accomplished, and as much as I am impressed by it when I fly over during the day, I'm even more impressed when I fly back at night. I have a friend, Tom Dent, who's a farmer and rancher up in Grant County, and he owns an application service, and he's an aviator, so he flies aerial application services, and he'll fly me back and forth. And at night, you know, what you really notice is the lights as far as you can see. And that, more than anything, really tells me how incredibly productive Eastern Washington is, because it really allows, you can see much farther, of course, when you can see the lights. It really tells you, I think, better than anything, how incredibly productive this land has become because of the availability of water, along with a whole lot of elbow grease and extremely hard work over several generations. And I was reminded as I was flying today, as I'm reminded always when I fly over here or drive, of my own family's story, which is a story of immigration and agriculture. My great-grandfather came from Ireland in 1868. He moved to Boston initially and went to work at the gasworks. And if you've ever been to Gasworks Park, or maybe you've been to another gasworks, you know what I'm talking about. It's a plant that would turn coal into petroleum, basically. And it must have been a smelly, messy, hard job. But he worked at the gasworks in Boston for 7 years. And in the course of that time brought over 2 of his brothers and 1 of his sisters. And in 1875, they'd finally saved up enough money that they were able to buy land, 160 acres each. Each of the 3 brothers bought 160 acres and bought that land from the railroad in northwestern Iowa. They don't irrigate in northwestern Iowa. It's all grace of God stuff, right? You just hope it rains when it needs to. But that's a very, very fertile part of the country if you've ever had a chance to be out that way. It's about, where my family's from, is about an hour due east of Sioux City, right there on the Iowa-South Dakota border. My grandfather moved out there with his brothers, and they had that 160 acres each from the railroad to begin with, and they homesteaded another 160 acres. And you know, the laws were that you had to live on the land continuously for a year in order to establish a homestead claim. So what they did is they dug a hole in the side of a small hill, dug out the sod and dug a hole. So it wasn't much of a hill, just a little bit of a slope. And then they parked the wagon over it every night. And during that first winter, I'm told that they kept the horses teamed up to that wagon the entire winter at night. That was their roof. And they slept in that hole, or the cave as it became known in family lore, throughout that winter until they had satisfied that requirement. And that's how they got the last 160 acres. So that was in the 1870s. In 1945, my great-grandfather, was 95 years old, and he was interviewed in the Storm Lake, Iowa newspaper under the headline, "Oldest Man in Town," because he was the oldest man in Storm Lake, Iowa in 1945. He was 95 years old, and they interviewed him and asked him about his memories of being an early settler and what it took to break sod and establish a farm. By that time, by the way, he had become quite successful and wealthy. He had several farms by the 20th century into the 1940s. But it was very interesting to me to read this article, which fortunately we still have, because the story he told was not a story of the success that he had or the fact that he'd been able to acquire more farmland and set up his own children in farming. No, the story he told was how he got ripped off by the grain elevator operators back in the 1880s or 90s. He was still bitter about it. Apparently, they had a really tough season, so he had to go back to the grain elevator to buy corn back for seed. And he was talking about how much more they charged him than what he was paid when he had delivered that corn to the grain silo or the grain elevator operator the year before. I thought it was quite striking that, you know, at least 50 years after the fact, that still stuck in his mind. And what that taught me, and that little vignette, was that you know, it was not an easy life. Not an easy life to be a farmer, to even, you know, before mechanization, but also after mechanization. It was not easy, and yet because he and his brothers had worked so hard, they left an amazing legacy. If you go to northwestern Iowa today, it's hard to turn around without bumping into or tripping over a McKenna. Because between the 3 of them, they had about 30 kids. My great-grandfather was the champ. He had 13, including my grandfather, Joe McKenna. Although I really think a lot more of the credit should go to Francis McKenna, my great-grandmother, who didn't live as long as my great-grandfather, and I understand why, having raised 13 kids. But they are, I think, a great story about American agriculture. And when I go back to Iowa today and visit my relatives with farms, the Belsons and Sokolowskis, and when I go back and stand on the land that is still in the